Hello everyone, this is Bentley, and instead of a stream today, we're going to have a pre-recorded kind of Q&A session. I've got a few questions that are gathered from you guys in the community. Some are from email, a few are from a community poll that I put up. A community post, not a poll. Already messed up. Anyway, I'm at the Greater Seattle Aquarium Society meeting. We have our elections for this particular meeting today, so as you're watching this, our elections are probably actually about to start. After the whole pandemic thing, there's been a little lower attendance just because people are starting to slowly get back in the rhythm of things and all that kind of stuff. So there's a minimum number of members that have to be present in order to form a quorum in order to elect new officers. So I'm helping out by making sure that one member is there to vote in addition to the others, just to make sure that we can get that stuff done. So for the new people who want to become members of our board and all that kind of stuff, it can get done. If you didn't know, this is part of a fish club usually, and support your local fish club. It's really, really important. They're amazing. They're awesome. If you don't have one, see if there's one in traveling distance. Best advice to you. Now, with that being said, let's get into questions. Question 1 from Bob Purcell, and there's a little additive as you'll see here. So Bob asks, what red or other non-green stem plants would you recommend for someone interested in trying something a little harder? And optimal growth conditions to grow them. CO2, light intensity, fertilization, etc. Okay. All three of the plants I'm going to suggest here all kind of have the same requirement. So let me go with those real fast. One is Nicea pedicellata. It's sometimes called Nicea golden. It's this beautiful yellow color when it's happy. It's got big long leaves and looks fantastic. Now, one of the tricks to this plant comes in the fact that in order to get that good color, you really need to do certain things. But those things are the same for all three of these plants, basically. So let's get to the other two species real fast. Second, Ludwigia atlantis. Now, I wouldn't say that this is necessarily hard, okay? But I don't want to go too hard. Unlike most of the other Ludwigias, however, it has this really cool orangey tone color. So now you got yellow and orange. But the big thing with this particular plant is in order to get it very, very happy, you have to do a few extra things. We're going to get to those just a sec. Third plant. We're going to go for more of the good kind of red tones here. And that is... I literally forgot the name of it. Hold on. I have to log in to my my app and look it up. It's a Rotala species. But my brain, it don't work. There we go. Okay. Rotala species mini butterfly. So the third plant is Rotala species mini butterfly. And the reason why I like this is it has kind of a unique leaf shape compared to a lot of the Rotalas. And when you do it right, it is a deep scarlet red. However, of these three plants, it's the most finicky. So what does this mean? Number one, we need some good intensity lighting. In many cases, depending on how tall your tank is, this means something even more powerful than a fluval plant 3.0. You can start looking at something like a Chihiros Vivid. You could look at like a UNS Titan if you want to go really crazy. But basically, you need very strong light. Now, you could do this with the fluval, but you would probably need 2 of them on a tank and really be pushing max light value the whole time in order to get optimal conditions for these 2 plants. For the 3 plants, rather. 3 plants. The Ludwigia will be okay with just a single fluval, The other two really do best if they would have very strong lighting. Second, they need some level of CO2. You don't necessarily have to have super high CO2, but something like 3 bubbles per second in a 40 breeder is enough to make sure that these are going to be happy. In order to get these plants to be successful, they basically need to be able to consume a lot of nutrients. Despite the fact that each of these is kind of a tougher plant, they're also very aggressive growers when they're happy. So what we need to do is provide a little bit of CO2 to get them into that mode, and you're more likely to have success. Finally, you really need to have any kind of water column fertilization, whether that's through EI dosing of a powder or using a liquid all-in-one. However, what I would say is in order to make these plants absolutely happy and really have the best chance of success with them, you want to be fertilizing daily. So instead of fertilizing, if you've got a liquid all-in-one, like every other day or every 3 days or only twice a week, you really want to mix that up and get it down to where you're dosing a smaller amount every day so they constantly have nutrients available to them. And each of these plants, especially in the case of the mini butterfly and the Nisea, they really do appreciate a little bit of extra trace minerals, so a little bit more micros in there. So don't be afraid to supplement with something like your Flourish Trace or my personal favorite, the Brightwell Florin Multi, just because it gives you a little boost of potassium in there too if you're keeping other stuff that's a little more potassium hungry. Hope that helps you out, Bob. Question 2 comes from Alec. What's your favorite plant right now? Good question. So, I kind of typically always have a favorite crypt, and crypts are usually my favorite, and then so are nymphaeas. Right now, if I was to pick a singular plant that is my favorite, I would probably have to go with the Ludwigia species Arcuata cross repens. I had a bunch of this growing in my angelfish tank, and it all stemmed from like 4 or 5 stems that were randomly floating in the guppy mansion when I did some cleanup. And after it kind of just like settled in and took off in the angel tank, I got to re-see why I love this plant in the first place. It has a really cool leaf shape for a Ludwigia. It has this kind of cool sphere, almost like an almondy shape, right? Kind of like how you would say some people's eyes look, or even like maybe my eyes, because I have just kind of smaller eyes. It has that kind of shape to its leaf. Toward the very top, it gets a beautiful red color, but as you go down, it kind of gets a little more orangey, and then eventually it fades to green in the lower growth. And that's kind of cool because as it stages up the plant, you have different colors in the foliage, and it just makes for a really cool appearance. And then when you're looking underneath from the plant, so you're getting that light coming through, it has this beautiful kind of fiery orange translucence that comes through on it, even if the top of the leaf is super red because it's wide at the water surface. It just looks incredible, and it's kind of a way that you can appreciate this plant from multiple angles. It's fairly easy. It doesn't actually require CO2 whatsoever because the part of that repens, it's a naturally occurring hybrid that's out there. It makes it easy, but the Arcuata gives it a few extra little perks, if you will, that makes it a little more interesting than your standard Ludwigia repens. So as far as what's my favorite plant right now, gonna have to go with that stem. Normally it's something a little more low maintenance, but right now that bad boy is my number one. Question 3, which is kind of question 3 and 4. So from Jaden T, what's your opinion on Vibrobites fed to rainbows? And Johnny over at Dan's Fish added on, if you could expand this to feeding pellets in general, that would be cool. Okay, let me start with the Vibrobites. So I've tried Vibrobites in the past. I got a small like army of the sample packs. I can't remember. I think it was at I think it was when I went to the AGA a while back when Vibrobites was relatively new, and I got like an army of those little sample packs and took them home. And I noticed something kind of weird. My rainbows didn't really go after that food all that much. My angelfish loved it. The guppies, as far as the adults, loved it, but the babies were too small to eat it. And so... and the cories liked it. When it finally hit the bottom, the cories that were in the tanks that had rainbows loved it. But my rainbows kind of were not that impressed, or just they weren't as aggressive when it comes to how fast they eat their food normally. they still ate it, and after a couple days of feeding that stuff exclusively, they kind of got on the train. But it's not like when I feed like the krill flakes from Extreme, where the very first time I fed that stuff, they went hog wild, and anytime it hits the tank, they go hog wild for it. So I don't think it's a negative necessarily. I just think that maybe it's part of the shape is weird, or my rainbows are just big divas and will only eat flake and frozen and live food. So with that being said, let me expand to pellets. I have a bias against pellets because I do a lot of rainbows, and rainbows in general have very small throats, so they actually eat much smaller food than you might think for like how big their heads are. Which, to be fair, rainbows' heads aren't that big compared to like cichlids, but you know what I'm saying. Right? They kind of look like they have just a giant mouth attached to this weird old body, but they have a very small throat, so actually they eat smaller foods in general. So this has led me over time to not really like pellet foods that much. I have way more success in getting my rainbows, and because most of my fish are rainbows, eating on flakes and a lot of small food. Now, where there's a difference is like the nano granule type size. So like if you're used to the Extreme Nano, and there's some other things that are very similar, super small granule size. I've had a lot of success with that. Aquarium Co-op used to have this like really small floating type pellet food that was like a little ball. It honestly looked kind of like colored fruity Captain Crunch or something in fish form. It was so small and colorful, but I know that sounds stupid, but that's all I ever think of whenever I used to feed it. And like foods like this here, so this was Tropical Supervit, which is something I really liked for a while, but it kind of became hard to find. And I'm going to see if I can even make this apparent. I'm just going to... Can I even get this on camera? Let me see. Do you guys see how small this is? And they're tiny, tiny, tiny little balls, but they're basically in the same size as like the Extreme Nano, where it's extremely small. When it comes to pellet or granule foods of that size, I actually do like them. I just tend to be more flake heavy because it's much easier to grind it to very small amounts. And so when I'm walking around my fish room, big rainbows, like I don't really have to grind it very small. I just throw it in. Angels, throw it in. Adult rainbows, whatever, they're fine. The guppy tank, though, is where it becomes different, and I can grind it really fine to make sure that it's small enough for the army of babies that sits in all that plant work. And I think that's where I guess you would say big bias against most pellet and granule foods is because I can't walk around with just a single container to all of my tanks in a room. I would have to be swapping for stuff to make sure that I had the right food for the baby fish, and then could use whatever I want on the adults. So because of that, I tend to be more swayed toward using a flake food, because most of the granules and stuff like that, they just don't break down super easy in my fingers. Now, if I was using like a coffee grinder or some kind of spice grinder or something like that, where I could grind a fine powder out of the same food and feed it on the side, maybe, but then it runs into that problem of it's not easy, where it's just one container I can grab, walk around. I'll often mix a bunch of flakes together to make kind of a super formula of my own, if you will, and it just makes my life super easy. So in general, while I think fiber mites is a fine food, especially for some of your pickier eaters, who like, especially if they eat like bloodworms a lot, it's a good way to get them off of bloodworms to a prepared food, so you're not constantly going through frozen bloodworms. But in the sense of feeding pellets, so like New Life Spectrum type foods and stuff like that, where pellets are one of their mainstays, I tend to avoid those because I've just seen in my personal experience where my fish are kind of like, they're very diva. They're pretty, they're gorgeous, they want attention, and they're going to be stubborn if I don't give them what they want. But I hope that answers your guys' question. Question 4. So now we're hitting email. And this came from Joseph. Hey, Bentley, sorry to bother you, but I accidentally spawned my turquoise rainbow fish. Yes. Or my tear spot barbs. Apparently, they were using the sponge I had in their aquarium. I moved it over to a new tank, and now I have a lot of baby rainbows, or barbs. They've been hatched for about a week now. How long until they will be able to eat baby brine shrimp? I really want to raise them up. So in the case of them being barbs, it might be faster because most barbs tend to grow faster than rainbows. Rainbows are very slow growers. In the case of rainbows, realistically, 2 to 3 weeks is about the earliest you can start transitioning to them to fresh hatched baby brine shrimp. And you really have to be on the ball about fresh hatch. So you have to get it down to where you know that like 60 to 70% of the eggs have hatched within the last hour or so. They have to be really, really fresh, where you're talking full yolk sac and that stuff. That's when they're also the smallest, because they do grow kind of fast. You'd be surprised how fast they go from their tiniest size to something big enough to where a baby rainbow might struggle. Me personally, I like to wait until about a month. So when I was raising rainbows, I would wait until I hit about the month mark of all my hatchlings, because that means that some of the stragglers who hatched a little later are usually at least 2 to 3 weeks at that point. And then I would start feeding my fresh hatch baby brine. If you're doing frozen baby brine, those are slightly bigger. So in that case, I would definitely wait till that month mark. If you can wait even to 6 weeks, do so. If you have a good food like Ceramicron or some kind of powdered food like that that's working well and you're not seeing any losses, stick to that. From there, you can start feeding baby brine like crazy and they'll grow like wildfire. Wildfire for what they are. Now, in the case of the barbs, even if you wait that long, they'll probably grow a lot faster once you get them onto that compared to the rainbows, and you'll know for certain. But rainbows at about a month, there's certain things you can identify that will tell you whether or not they really are rainbow babies. And at 6 weeks to 2 months, you'll know for certain because you'll see that basic rainbow body shape start kicking in. You just won't have any color. So I hope that helps you in kind of a feeding plan. Good luck. Let me know how things go, Joseph. Question 5. So this comes from Brian. And actually I have 2 questions from Brian. They're very different, but I think they're both really awesome. So he starts with, so I have a couple of newbie questions for you. First, in regards to the various brands of plant aquascaping tools and kits out there, which ones do you prefer to use or are of pretty decent quality? On Amazon, I've seen quite a few brands made by companies most likely based in China that run from low teens and up, but then I've also seen kits like the ones from Nylock G that are around $45. I'm sure there are many others with better names that even more expensive, just not sure if I'm paying for quality or just a name though. So your opinion would be appreciated. So I very recently actually bought a fairly cheap kit of tools from Haiger, and basically Haiger makes a lot of stuff. They import a lot of stuff from China and they just brand their name on it. There's a lot of companies that do this, but Haiger has in general, I think, done a good job of taking care of their customers, and that's something I care about. So when you're doing this kind of stuff, I think customer service becomes super important. They have one of the black tool sets. I've been using it for 2 months now, and I'm pretty happy with it. I think the difference between it and my previous Aqua Vitro tools, I basically just ended up needing more tools because my tanks are spread all over the place, and every once in a while a tool goes missing for a month, and I'm like, I need to plant X, Y, or Z, and I can't find those tweezers or something, so I ended up needing more tools, basically. It's the short of it. Then I also bought a pair of spring-loaded tweezers, which are normally referred to as moss scissors, if you're going to look those up on Amazon. And I'll put some links down in the description for those who want them. But I like those a lot if you want a slightly nicer scissor and you don't need to cut very thick things, those spring-loaded ones. Otherwise, I would say if you really want to get something nice, get yourself one really nice pair of the ADA quality tweezers. But only do this for the tweezers, especially if you want a extra long set of pin sets, as our friends in the UK like to call them. But for those tweezers, if you want something that's a little bit longer than the standard tool set, or you just want a really nice quality one with a very fine nose to it, look at ADA. I know they're expensive, but you really are getting the right quality with the ADA tools. For scissors and the little gravel spade thing, don't. Honestly, for the gravel spade, I buy plastic putty knives, either from craft stores or from paint stores. I think those are far more effective, and they're dirt cheap in comparison. Now, granted, some of those kits are really, really cheap, but you get a much bigger piece, and you get a lot of size options with those putty knives that I think are really, really versatile and way more effective, but you don't need them very often, so You might not need to go that crazy. In the case of scissors, most of our plants you can actually break with your fingernails if you're good enough. But if you want to make sure that you have a decent pair of shears, any of those like relatively inexpensive ones are going to do fine. Just make sure that if they're stainless steel and not one of the coated ones, make sure it's a brand you recognize or has a lot of ratings. That would be my only suggestion. And realistically, like if you spend that little extra bit and you spend like $20 for one tool at like the Aqua Vitro kind of level, which is usually in stores, the difference is so minimal that it really doesn't matter. It's not until you start going really up the chain to like the ADA level quality stuff that you start to really see that difference. So from there, I would say if you want to support a company like Nylock G, who is in the United States, is awesome. Pretty confident their tools are also made in China by somebody else, but they might be a little bit higher quality bar than some of the other stuff that's out there. Feel free, but I would say something like your Hygers or something like that, if it's a name you kind of recognize as doing a lot of aquarium products, it's probably okay. You don't have to stress too much. Those tools, even the cheap ones, can take a lot of abuse. Save yourself some money unless you really need a super nice pair, and then get just one really nice pair of tweezers. That's the route I would go. Now, for that next question. Question 6, our last question. Second question I have is in regard to Java Fern. I have a number of plants that I purchased from PetSmart back in early February that I super glued to rocks that are not doing all that well, but did sprout a lot of little baby plants along their leaves, ranging from about 1/2 inch to 2 inches tall now. Nice. I'm pretty sure I saw in one of your videos about purposely stressing out Java Fern to quickly propagate a bunch of new ones. You're correct. Which I happened to do by chance, apparently. Now the question is, what exactly do I do with all these little baby tiny Java Ferns growing on these older leaves? Do I attach them to something? And if so, how do I go about doing so when considering their small size? I'm afraid super glue would be a bit too much for them, and I don't really have a rhizome yet that you could tie down using thread. Okay, there's like 3 ways we can do this, and I think all of them are great. Number 1, leave them on the leaves as long as possible until they basically detach themselves. That will help get some growth and build a tiny rhizome. Now you might still have worry about trying to tie that down or trying to glue that and being too much, and I totally understand. So there's 2 ways we can do this. Number 1, find cholla wood. Cholla wood has lots of little kind of lacy holes in it, and what I do is I take those baby plants and I just friction push them into the holes. So the leaves are coming out, but then everything else is out of the or inside the wood itself, and I let that grow out. This usually gets me to a point of where I have a much more robust plant, and often it will break the cholla wood as it grows, and then eventually I can just extract the bigger plant and do whatever I want with it. Or in this case, more commonly what I tend to do is I let it be in the cholla wood and I just move that cholla wood wherever I want it to be, and it holds down the fort and builds me a nice little bush of Java Fern. Now, this tactic only works so well if you get those teeny tiny ones that most stores have. It's a little bit better if you get the bigger, chunkier logs, or you can get something that's actually been like sourced from a friend and treated, and it's a really cool, ornate piece that you want to have in your tank for like a year or so, because that stuff will break down kind of quick. That's just what cholla wood does. My second option might be a little more viable, and that is find yourself some kind of in-tank breeding box, whether that's like the Zis one that the co-op carries, or even those net ones made by Lee's, where it's just like a blue frame and you just have like a net that goes around it, basically. Have that inside your tank. Put all the baby Java Fern in there. That way they can float and not get sucked up into a filter, and make sure that they're getting some amount of light. You might have to get a smaller light that goes over the top of them, some kind of clip-on or something, depending on the size of the tank you're doing this in. But make sure they're getting some amount of light, and just let them sit there and let them grow until they're the size that you feel safe either tying them down or gluing them in place. And then from there you can attach them to whatever you want, friction fit them into stuff. I've actually used this tactic a couple times when I was most recently doing the kind of rescape work in the Guppy Mansion. I selected a lot of plants and put them in a breeder box and kept them safe in the same water system for a while as I was doing some planning. And then more importantly, before that, when I did the running river tank, a bunch of those plants actually sat in a breeder box just getting some ambient sunlight through a window, because Java Fern is super low demand. And they sat like that for about 2 to 3 weeks while I let some of those actually grow out with like little drops of fertilizer just to help them do stuff, right? And I would just come in once a day and mix it around and top off the water a little bit. That's it. Help them grow inside of there till they got the size I wanted them to, in order to start putting them inside the rescaped running river tank. When I did that particular big rescape, undoing the Plants for Profit tank and turning it into the tank it is now. I think it's really, really effective. It's super easy, but more importantly, the reason why we're doing this is we're just trying to prevent those plants from getting sucked into a filter. We want to keep them in one safe place where we can kind of manage them, pay attention to them, and put them back. But we know that like water flow is moving around. They're going to get their nutrients from a water, the water column, all your fertilizers, all that kind of stuff. All the usual things we would do with big adult plants. The only difference is they're kind of contained and floating, so they can grow out a little bit, get to the size we need them to, and then from there we can do what we want. That's it. That's your Q&A session, guys. A little shorter than the usual stream. Sorry about that. We'll be back to our normal stream next week. Let me know, did you learn something new today? Did you enjoy that? Let me know in the comments down below. Please, please, please. I really appreciate that. If you did find a particular question and answer really interesting, maybe you've got a friend who needs something, share it, give it a little like, all the usual YouTube beggarino things. It's the best way to help out your favorite fish channels, honestly, and it doesn't cost you anything. It just takes a few seconds to smash the like button, leave a comment, all the usual engagement stuff, right? If you don't enjoy this stuff, you're angry I didn't do a live stream, you hit the thumbs down twice, I'll understand. With that being said, gang, thank you so much for watching, and stay awesome.